Welcome to Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. You are going to hear the stories from the eclectic life of a guy who is a professional counselor, a family man, a SWAT team chaplain, outdoor enthusiast, a guy involved with ropes, 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, a chaotic Jedi, and who is a recipient of an honorary doctorate from the University of Adversity. Using these stories, we take the facts lead to concepts, and from the concepts we make a variety of life applications. Just a caveat about the facts. Most of the time we will tell you the facts just the way it happened, but once in a while we'll give you the facts the way other people remember how it happened, and that usually includes a tablespoon of embellishment. No harm is meant, just good, clean fun for educational purposes. Please subscribe and share this with your friends. As always, we thank you for keeping up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Faulkner University introduces the Master of Arts in Christian Counseling and Family Ministry. Many youth ministers are not well prepared for the complex challenges facing youth, parents, and families today. This program is not designed to fulfill any requirements toward becoming a licensed counselor, but it is designed to equip the career youth and family minister to do just that, minister to families, by integrating prevention-oriented counseling skills and intervention strategies within a church setting. The courses include, but are not limited to, counseling skills, counseling couples and families in crisis, family dynamics, human intimacy and sexuality, parent and character education, as well as church assessments. All courses may be completed online from the convenience of your home or workplace and at the time that fits your schedule. Most courses are only 8 weeks long. There is a 60% tuition discount for members of the Churches of Christ. Visit the website faulkner.edu/KGST. KGST stands for Curley Graduate School of Theology. That's faulkner.edu/KGST, or contact Jimmy Holland, Director of Biblical Studies Recruiting, at jholland, HOLLAND, jholland@faulkner.edu with any questions or to find out about the eligibility requirements for the tuition discount. Faulkner University is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Metaphor is the stuff tragedies are made of. She screamed. Not the squeal of someone who is pleased, surprised, or overjoyed, but the type scream you hear when someone is terrified, traumatized, or even both. The screaming was first, and the tears came next, and then the attempt at an apology followed, but it was too late. One of my early mentors, a guy named Lamar Harbin, and Lamar was one of the strongest men that I knew when I was growing up. He was athletically and country strong. He lived on a farm out in Chakalaka. He was quite an accomplished athlete and a woodworker. He built the presswood box that sits under this desk and contains several of my keepsakes. He also built the drawing table I designed. I drew the plans, but he built it, and I traded him my bike for it when I was in the 9th grade. But before all that, he built rabbit boxes. My dad would call it a rabbit gum because I think the ones he made were made out of the log of a gum tree. The premise is pretty simple. You build a wooden box. It's 24 inches long, 7 or 8 inches wide, 7 or 9 inches high. You leave one end open. The front opening should have some kind of a slot or parallel grooves so that a small wooden door can slide down into it and seal the box. The top of the box is outfitted with a pivot stick. Now, this could be carved out of a piece of wood or just a forked stick, and it is used to suspend a pivot. On one end of this long pivoting stick is a string that holds the door, and on the other end of it is a trigger. This trigger is a notched stick that is inserted into a hole about 3/4 of the way back of the rabbit box. This trigger, once it is set, holds the door up. and you put some bait or something in the back of the trap. I always used a sliced apple. And then as the rabbit walks into the dark tunnel, sniffing at the apple, his head bumps the little notched stick. The stick comes loose, and the weight of the door closes, and you've trapped the rabbit into the box. That's why it's called a rabbit box. I did not trap rabbits to kill them or to eat them. I merely trapped them to see if I could trap them. I forget the number of rabbits that I captured. I used to keep a log. I checked the trap every morning before school, walking out right at daylight or a little before daylight through the pine trees and down in that area where the pine tree monster lived, walking over the frosted ground to check my trap. Pretty simple. You look and see if the door has been tripped. The door is closed. You up in the box, you slide the door, and you look down into the box at your prize. And typically what you're looking at is the rear end of a bunny. One morning, several mornings, actually, I opened the trap to the snapping pointed muzzle of a very angry possum, but most days it was just bunnies and that little cottontail sticking up. It's those little cottontail bunnies you see at night in your yard or very early in the morning. And I don't remember. It was probably Mom's birthday. Mom's birthday is October the 22nd, but it could have been Mother's Day. But I don't think I was trapping rabbits in the early spring. I always remember catching rabbits when there was a little bit of frost on the ground. I had saved my earnings and allowance to buy my mom one of those decorative powder boxes. Now, we watched movies, and there were ladies at church, and we thought they were wealthier than we were, and they were probably just wearing fake. But we saw people in fur coats and fur stoles, and especially the people from Hollywood wore a lot of furs. And I did not have the means for such luxuries, but I was resourceful. Imagine my sense of satisfaction when I removed the synthetic powder applicator from the decorative box that I had bought my mother, and I tossed it away with derision and lovingly placed the powder puff tail of a rabbit into my gift. I can't tell you how many times I've heard my mom talk about rabbits having a powder puff tail. You'd see a bunny and she'd go, "Oh, look at his powder puff tail." It didn't matter if we saw them live in the yard or on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. If we saw a rabbit, my mom would point out, "Oh, look, it has a powder puff tail." There were several ladies at church who had stoles and coats, but none of them, and I do mean none of them, had an authentic, real, genuine rabbit tail powder puff. It seemed obvious to me that such luxury should come in powder boxes. After all, I'd heard my mom talk about powder puff tails. But I knew we were not wealthy, and I couldn't afford such items. And I thought possibly those kind of authentic, real fur powder puffs existed, but they were not stocked at Jean-Claude Pinet in the Quintard Mall. But I had gone to some lengths to secure a genuine, authentic rabbit fur powder puff tail for my mother. Imagine my alarm when my mom unwrapped the gift, opened the powder box, and upon seeing the severed rabbit's tail began with the screaming. Yes, the screaming. The powder remains unused to this day, at least the powder that stayed in the box after she dropped it or threw it. The whole thing was thrown away. Something about the possibilities of fleas, contaminants, or some kind of hairborne pathogens. We'd been strictly warned years before, and I mean, I was a little bitty boy when this happened. We'd been strictly warned years before not to scare mom with bugs, spiders, lizards, frogs, creatures, or creepy crawlies. It was a lesson passed on to us from our dad, and it was pressed upon us when we were small boys. It was one of those things you remember. I remember squirrel hunting with dad, quote unquote, on the squirrel hunting part. We were walking in the woods and we're walking through a field, and he would encourage us, "Hey, that's a pretty flower. Why don't you take that home to mom when we go back?" This was not the type of squirrel hunting I anticipated, but a lesson was given that when you're out doing whatever you're doing, you should always think of mom. The discussion about the bugs and the critters, that was, hey, you don't use these things to scare or frighten your mother. You don't chase her with them, and you don't put those things on her. It was not given to us from the standpoint of, hey, you don't scare your mom. but it was given from the standpoint of mom is my girl. And you guys can't pick on, tease, or frighten my girl. It was the very first man-to-man talk I remember, and it was a man talking to a little boy, and this was pressed up on me. I learned then that Dad loved us in a very, very special way, but Mom came first. And his job as dad was to protect her. And I probably took that a little too seriously. I would grow up applying that lesson and finding reasons and excuses to step to the defense of girls. I protected girls at school. I protected the girls I dated. I protected girls I knew from church. I even protected my Yankee cousins when they moved to Alabama. No one picked on girls in my presence, and no one picked on Mom. We could be walking through the store, and if I caught someone looking too long at her misshapen feet, I would step between them and her and stare at them with the most intensity that I could generate in my little childish face. I don't know how many times Mom had to call me off of some stranger or settle me down. But despite the careful warnings, despite all the caution that Dad had given us about bugs, insects, reptiles, slithery things, winged things, or creepy crawlies, no one, and I mean no one, had given me a heads up on animal parts. Now, in those days, it's kind of trendy. It was even popular to have a keychain with a dyed lucky rabbit's foot on it. I never quite figured out how one associates a removed rabbit appendage as the harbinger of luck. I'm relatively sure that one does not have three-legged rabbits running around, no pun intended. The feet that were suspended from these keychains and dyed, these feet no doubt were acquired in the transformational process of rabbits becoming Hassenpfeffer. I had not been warned not to give your mother rabbit parts. She was mortified. I was embarrassed, and she couldn't help herself. She couldn't hide her reaction. It was that gut level, kind of thing. Gone was the ability to take a scribbled piece of paper and display it on the fridge like a fine piece of art. There was no feigned appreciation over a hastily chosen card. There was no you shouldn't have, but the legit terror-filled you should not have. I couldn't hide my bewilderment and confusion. The only other party to suffer more loss and disappointment than me was the tailless rabbit. And I will add to my pride that the rabbit who donated said powder puff did so unwillingly and was not killed in the process. He was harmed and probably traumatized to the fourth generation, no doubt, but he'd been mutilated and humiliated for naught. His sacrifice would never be appreciated. At least he probably never learned that his tail was spurned. He probably never even told the other rabbits the truth about how he lost his tail. One does not hop up to a fellow bunny and say, "What's up, Doc? What's the tail of the tail?" I do not believe rabbits speak of such things in private and polite conversation in the warrens. But here I was, the other suffering party. I was shocked, bewildered, confused, disoriented, and I could only sputter, "But you said..." And her only response was, "I said it, but I didn't mean it like that." My wife and I have a rule. Say what you mean what you say, but don't be mean. I wasn't as crushed, I guess, as I was just bewildered. She'd always talked about powder puff tails. She would have been the only lady at church who would have an authentic, genuine fur powder puff. But that's not actually what she wanted. That was not what she meant. But how was I, as a child, expected to know the difference in what she said and what she meant? When we give value to things intentionally or unintentionally, real or implied, other people will strive to attain them. They will strive to achieve them. They'll strive to deliver on them, especially people with whom we have influence. We give emphasis or we put value on grades and athleticism and musical ability and artistic impression and degrees and careers and cars and boats. And a number of things are assigned a value, and people that we influence, specifically our children, will pursue them in order to give themselves value or to get our approval. Children will go to great lengths to accomplish, achieve, or attain the things. And often we never realize how much emphasis we gave those things, and our children thought we put that great value and that great emphasis on them simply because they overheard or heard us or interpreted what they heard incorrectly. What you focus on gets measured, and what's measured gets focused on. There's this interesting thing I used to do with teenagers and parents in youth ministry. I'd put them in a room and I would say, hey, take a piece of paper and list the 5 most important things emphasized in your homes. Now, you got to remember that parents sitting in a room with a youth minister understand this is a loaded question. The 5 most important things in our home when you're talking to the youth minister are God, Jesus, church, Christianity, evangelism, and purity. The students in the other room, not being savvy enough to know this is a loaded survey, would say, hey, the things that I hear at my house most are grades, ACT, college, job, money, and a spouse. It's funny when you get together and you say, hey, mom and dad, this is what you think, this is what you told us you're emphasizing, but this is what your children are interpreting as literally the most important things in your life. Metaphor is the stuff tragedies are made of. We may be emphasizing, comparing, or substituting the wrong things for our children or even our spouses. People may hear what we say, not understanding how our words actually fit into the scheme of reality. Or we may assume that our children, our employees, our church members, our spouses can decipher what is really valuable in spite of how they hear us talk. My mom compared the tail of a rabbit with a powder puff, but never once said the tail looks like a powder puff but would not make a good one. She called it a powder puff tail, and I delivered exactly what I heard her say. What I heard was that she idolized and valued the tail as a powder puff. I had heard that the tail of a rabbit would make a great powder puff. It does not. And just because a rabbit's tail looks like a powder puff does not mean it would be suitable to make one. A severed rabbit's tail in a box of powder does not, in fact, make it a powder puff. It is a severed tail of a rabbit in a box of powder. A powder puff-like tail and a tail as a powder puff are not the same thing. And by the time the screaming and crying stops, you realize they aren't even close. A good living is not the same as living a good life. Attending church is not the same as being a Christian. Getting a degree is not the same thing as being smart. Getting married is not the same thing as being a spouse. Having a child is not the same thing as being a parent. Knowledge is not the same thing as wisdom. And being successful at X, Y, or Z is not the same thing as being a success. And just because someone with a blog or a post or a podcast or a platform says it's valuable does not indeed give it value. She cried. Now, she may have been embarrassed. I think she cried for me. My mom cries at a lot of stuff, but she was crying for me. She cried for herself. She had, without meaning to, said things in a way that I had placed value on something in a way that she never intended. And she felt bad because I thought I was being successful in my gift giving. I thought I was being successful in my gifts, but I had failed. She unknowingly had given something she found repulsive as having value, and I'd believed her. I'd fallen for it. I'd made it a goal and shown it to her, expecting her to be so proud of it. Many things we've heard, many things we've been told, many things we've listened to, idolized, elevated as being coveted, excellent, important, prized, things that we believe to be the markers of success or the catalyst for happiness. After we spend our lives pursuing them, and after we go to great efforts to achieve them or attain them, and after our children spend their lives pursuing them, by the time the crying stops, we realize they were not even close. Powder puff tails should literally not be taken. And powder puff tails, TALES, should not be taken literally.